TV. Hi, I'm Brian Kehew. I'm the guest curator for the ARP exhibit here at the Museum of Making Music, which is the NAMM organization, National Association of Music Merchandisers. They have an annual convention for musical instrument makers and sellers. And so they've asked us to do a representation of the history of the ARP synthesizer situation here. We have it in three parts. Spotlight on ARP. The NAMM people had a great concept for the title, Innovator, Instruments, and Impact. The innovator being Alan R. Pearlman, who's mentioned here on the left. He was the founder who designed the first ARP synthesizers. And this is his 100th anniversary of his birth, so we thought this is an appropriate time to have celebrations throughout this year. And that's the core of it. And then the instruments, of course, became his and the team's inventions. And so the ARP synthesizers are well represented here from different periods. And then the last part, being modern, is the impact in modern day. Why are these old instruments and the designs people made many years ago, why are they still valid today? And if you look to the left, we've worked sort of in a chronological way. Most of the things in a museum are rather surface level. We can't go very deep because there's so much to see, and they have to have people come in and move fairly straightforward and quickly through a museum. So we're able to touch on the bullet points and the kind of highlights of the ARP synthesizer, Alan Pearlman's world, and then today what people are doing. If you look on the left, the very first synthesizer he created, his first musical release, was the ARP 2500, and we don't have one of those. It's very valuable and quite rare, but we wanted to show that. And then as we move through, this is an old paper, an original that shows you what their initial offerings were. That big one in its largest form with 3 cabinets. The next invention was a lot more reasonable, which is the famous ARP 2600, and we have one loaned here for the exhibit. It was definitely great for education and schools because you see the graphics on there shows you the flow of things, very clear, very good layout. And that's why this is talked about a teaching tool, a learning tool, etc. We even have some cool graphics. Dina Pearlman put together some for us, and I made them into wired modules up on the wall, which is just fun, but we like to do something a little artsy. And then a picture which has never been released before, I found at the 1972 NAMM show. This is the ARP booth, and they had a really fantastic idea to blow up the panel from the 2600. I think it was the year after it was released as their main booth. So the photo's never been seen before, but there's a little white ARP Odyssey on there. And then a prototype of what was going to become the Pro Soloist is seen in that picture. The only time we ever see it, and 1 or 2 little ads, but I think there was only one. Maybe it didn't even work. One of our coolest instruments is next here, the ARP Odyssey, which is quite famous and was my first synthesizer. And it was great to learn on, good for bands to use. The reason this one is so special is a composer, musician friend of mine named Ego Plum was given this by the Resonance, and the Resonance is one of my favorite groups. They're like, if the Beatles were weird, that's the Resonance. So you might remember them. People have seen their eyeball head costumes. And this was their main synthesizer for most of their heyday. And later on in life, they gave it to him, and he keeps it and got it restored and working well. Also a celebrity instrument, I'm very lucky to have it, Pro Soloist. This is Tony Banks from Genesis. This is his Pro Soloist, or one of the 2 that I know he toured with. We can also see, besides being a known ARP synthesizer, it was used on 3 or 4 of the biggest Genesis albums, including This Lamb Lies Down on Broadway record. Definitely features that synthesizer very heavily. And live on the Seconds Out record, selling England by the Pound album. So he was a great lead synthesizer player at the time, but we noticed that this one was modified for the stage because normally those switches are just black and they're really hard to spot in the dark. So when he's flipping up and down, they put white tips on them to make it more usable on a dark stage. And then below it, a nice platform to support a keyboard like that is the ARP Omni 2 string polyphonic synthesizer. So it was the American version of the ARP string synthesizer that was made in Italy, but this is the Americanized version of it and modernized and updated. The ARP Omni, and this is the Omni 2, are surprisingly the biggest successes they ever had. It's kind of bare bones and it's pretty straightforward, but that was their most popular instrument, is the ARP Omni 2. And if you listen to some cool things like Joy Division, the Cars, records like that, the string sounds are coming from that instrument. Next in line, time-wise and otherwise is the famous but infamous ARP Avatar. And the Avatar was an idea to use guitars to control the synthesizer instead of a piano, organ, keyboard. They spent tons of money on it, tons of time, and it really didn't take off. Guitar players could not adapt their technique enough to make it work well, and it glitched a lot and it didn't track well. The guitar players are used to playing sloppy and wild. Even Pete Townsend, who we show here several times in the exhibit because he's such a core and main ARP user on so many huge records. But he was really trying to make the ARP Avatar work, but certainly as a wild guitar player, didn't get tons of use out of it. But if anyone knows the MTV and his hit single Rough Boys, it opens with ARP Avatar guitar parts. We found a picture that's never been seen, 1978 NAMM show on the back wall, blown up into a poster. And that was their display for the NAMM show in 1978. So it's never been seen. I found it just a few weeks ago on someone's camera roll that they'd taken pictures of the show, and they happen to have this. And then time-wise, the next two keyboards, ARP was developing a few instruments. They have this thing, we show the brochure called an ARP piano down below. And they wanted to make something that used analog synthesis since samples weren't available. They wanted to have a polyphonic analog instrument that played like a piano. And you could of course do things like Rhodes or harpsichord or vibes on it, but it has a touch sensitive keyboard. It is polyphonic. It uses the divide down circuitry that makes that possible, but it's a surprisingly good synthesized piano, synthesized vibes. But what makes it important for the players at the time is it has weighted keys, it's polyphonic, and it's touch sensitive. So things like Prophets and Oberheims only had 4 or 8 voices. This has a voice for every key going on. For many of the, two-handed things, you could do 10 notes at a time if you could reach it, but it was touch sensitive as well, which all the keyboard players of the time really were demanding. And then up top is an absolute icon of synthesizers. ARP designed and developed this, and as they were about to launch it, they made 3 or 4 prototypes, and then they sold the company to Rhodes, the same keyboard company that was working after the Fender Rhodes design. Chroma is a very advanced synthesizer, modern for the time in a lot of ways, but it has a difficulty in programming. I think this sounds fantastic. The keyboard is great. Everything about the design is great except for the one thing. They took all the knobs and the sliders off to make it more efficient. And so other companies like DX7 were doing that with digital instruments at the same time. You save a lot of money by taking the sliders and the knobs off, but as we know now, that's not a good idea. It's very hard to program. So most people who got it didn't understand how capable it was and what a monster of a synthesizer it is. But that is a great idea that was implemented and sold as the Rhodes Chroma. It's an ARP design, as you can tell from the look of it. And then we move into the Impact, which is the modern day thing where all these old instruments went away, they were less popular, and then finally we have demand for them. The scarcity of instruments like the Chroma, the 2600 made them very expensive. And one of the things that drove was not only the high prices of modern ones and recreations, but people said, like Korg, got the ARP name and said, we're going to make physical recreations, the same circuits. It's about 2/3 the size to save money, but they've done ARP 2600s and Odysseys in the full size. So they've taken some of the most popular versions and made modern hardware. It is analog circuitry and it does work like the originals, but you have things like MIDI, which is useful. And then down below, we mentioned the software companies like Cherry Audio, who's here today. And they do recreations of most of the ARP synthesizers. This is 3 of them being shown right there, which is the Pro Soloist, the Quadra, and the 2600. And the rarest of those being the Quadra. We don't even have one in the exhibit right now, but they're rare. And if you do find one, they're generally not working. And at the far end, although it's not chronological in time, we have a keyboard inside on the stage right now. It was donated today to Dina, and it's this ARP Soloist, a very early ARP product. And on the left side, you see my brochure for it, from my collection of brochures. And they're talking about putting it on top of the organ for home and stage organists to have an extra voice, an extra sound to solo with. The reason this is on the right-hand side, out of time chronologically, was it was bought and used by Don Lewis, and Don Lewis is the whole exhibit over here. This giant instrument called Leo is electronic orchestra of synthesizers. So that's really was here already, but we wanted to place it here because his keyboard is here, and in the instrument he has two large ARP 2600s, as well as a Hammond organ, several Roland keyboards. The bottom keyboard up here, top keyboard up there is a Pro Soloist keyboard, so he can do the touch controls and so forth. And then he's got Oberheim modules as well as some Roland echoes and things like that. So Don Lewis's story was already very present here at the museum. And since his wife was donating this really old instrument that he started with, it was his first synthesizer. It ties the bridge between the ARP synthesizer history and Don Lewis, who became a real major synthesizer pioneer. And I'm going to show you the last piece over here. We decided to show some iconic things. We had an extra wall, not a place to put instruments, but we wanted to show images, specifically the names of the artists and the records, some of the greater advertisements and graphics of the time period. So we were able to use this extra wall at the NAMM Museum, and it gives us another third dimension on the history of these pieces. So many famous records, some we've mentioned, like the Genesis and the Residents. And all these people like Vangelis, Joe Zawinul, Depeche Mode, Gary Newman, Sly and the Family Stone, Parliament. These are all users from the many days of ARP. And I even put this one in specifically because this hugely famous Madonna record uses ARP synthesizer for almost all the bass tracks. Anyways, thanks for checking in, and we will probably be here through February of next year. If you're in Carlsbad, which is just north of San Diego, about 2 hours south of Los Angeles, the ARP exhibit is on here, and they have tons of other cool instruments like an original theremin, Hammond Nova Chord, Carpenter's Mellotron, cool things like that here at the museum.
To find out more about ARP, the Innovator, the instruments, the impact at the Museum of Making Music, please visit their website and check out the description below this video. You can also find out more about the Alan R. Pearlman Foundation and how to support their work preserving the ARP legacy. Thanks for watching, and please subscribe to CatSynth TV.
And you are watching CatSynth TV.